Good morning, Principles of Management class. Welcome to Chapter 3. In this chapter, we take a look at the manager's work environment and ethical responsibilities. So, yes, today we are going to be talking about business ethics. So, let's go ahead and get right into it. This week, you'll be able to see that we have 7 learning objectives that we will take a look at over the course of this online lecture here. That means for your project, you will be only required to have 21 questions as opposed to 24 for your first, like your first 2 projects were. So a little bit less required of you in terms of the project this week. And of course, as we all know too, at least hopefully by now, is your current event articles this week will be based off of 2 of these 7 learning objectives here in chapter 3. So with the world that we live in today, probably not going to have an issue finding any articles relating to business ethics, either for or against business ethics this week. So hopefully you find this week's current event article search a little bit easier. So when we talk about managing yourself, preparing yourself for business, for being a manager, for being an employee, we have to stop and think about what we talk about called being courageous at work, right? And I think the reason why the authors insert this slide and this part of the chapter into our book, into our course, is that I believe that there's a lack of lack of willingness for confrontation, I guess is what I'm trying to say, where I feel as if I think we're getting towards a place in society where individuals would almost rather quit than discuss with a manager about how maybe they're not being properly treated, or how they may have issues with leadership roles and confrontation. So I think this part of the slide here, this part of the book in chapter 3, talks about just being courageous at work. And here's the thing: is it's not something for a lot of us that just comes natural. The art of conflict and really asking for what you want, and it's something that you have to get practice at, because in management, in business, you're going to have sticky situations that require quite honestly, confrontation. And it's not where it has to be hostile confrontation, but it is confrontation in a sense that we might have a manager or a group that wants one thing, and you may want the other thing, and you may want something else, right? And the negotiation, or the confrontation, again, doesn't have to be aggressive, it doesn't have to be hostile. But if you don't have practice in asking for what you want, then issues can arise in terms of maybe you feeling like you do not get your way, in certain instances. So we talk about practicing being courageous at work, but there are ways that we can do this, right? And we think about one way that we can do this is what we call practice in a low risk setting. So when we think about low risk settings, we think about where there's nothing bad is going to come of trying to negotiate and ask for what you want. Think about your management projects that you do weekly. This would be an example of a low risk setting where nobody's gonna lose their job or get hurt, or have any really negative effects by you asking, hey, what if we tried doing the project this way, or what if we tried asking the questions like this, right? That idea of again, confrontation being not hostile, again, right? It's just simply asking a question, but it's a low risk setting, so you have that opportunity to sort of ask for what you want. As you practice, that becomes your outlet, that becomes your way of getting better at confrontation and asking for what you want, when it comes to being a manager and an employee, right? Because again, we're seeing, I think, in management as a whole, that we're seeing this sort of as a lost art. The second part there is plan for an endurance event. Okay, so part of being courageous is the willing to endure hardship. So courage requires a series of courageous acts rather than a one-time intervention. You should be prepared for a lengthy and uncomfortable journey that will never go smoothly nor completely your way. All right, so you're going to find that in management and just in life in general, you're going to be dealing with individuals that again don't always see eye to eye with you on how certain events should be handled or certain tasks to be completed. So it's again not something where you ask for what you want one time, boom, done, over with. You're going to live in harmony for the rest of time. No, it's something again that you're going to have to practice at. There's going to be a lot of times where you have to get out of your comfort zone a little bit and negotiate for what you want. But also, and the last part there is you should plan to face a resistant and unsupportive organizational responses. Okay. So we hope this isn't the case, but we do have to acknowledge and recognize that, sometimes, an organization isn't going to always be the most supportive to your ideas and, to your proposals. And you have to plan to face that resistance and, not take it personally in a sense that they think less of you for proposing it, but again just recognizing that business is business, and sometimes they feel as if whatever you're proposing may not be feasible or may not be the best direction of the company. So you should come to suspect, or come to expect, not suspect, expect that sort of resistance or potentially even an unsupportive organization. All right. So the key point here with this slide is it takes a lot of courage to ask for what you want at work. And again, sort of engage in, confrontation when it comes to, standing up for yourself. Right. So the key point here is, prepare, that sometimes this is going to happen, and practice the fact that, you may not, the only way you're going to get better at asking for what you want is by simply practicing. Okay. So that is a little bit on the manage you part and being courageous at work. All right. Shifting gears now into a little bit more of our focus here for the chapter, which is more ethics and doing the right things. The goals for businesses. All right. A lot of times, and you've maybe even heard me say it before, the number one the number one goal in business is to make money, right? And while that does become a focus point, obviously, of businesses, never have I said that is the only goal of business, right? So the goals of business are oftentimes more than making money. Ultimately, yeah, we want to be profitable, we want to make money in our business, but ultimately, this is not the only focus of a business when it comes to practicing commerce and participating in the larger economy. Today, businesses have found that there is the triple bottom line, or the triple P's as we call it. We call it people, planet, and profit. And we're going to investigate here a little bit more with what each of those triple P's mean. And then we're also going to kind of take a look at the younger workers' search for meaning in the workplace, because as you can probably guess, millennials and Gen Zers have a different outlook on work and the job as opposed to their older counterparts. So with this being an intro level management course, we sort of take the focus on the younger generation of workers and your place in it. All right. So the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. So in this view of corporate performance, an organization has a responsibility to its people, planet, and profit, right? So again, no longer is profit just the sole focus. We have a focus and a responsibility to our planet Earth as a whole in terms of sustainability of the planet, and then also the people that are working for the organization. And success in these areas can be measured through what's called a social audit. So when we talk about the term social audit, sometimes this is the employees of a company. Sometimes too, it can be outside organizations or interest groups that will go through and measure a company's corporate culture, right? In terms of how well do they treat their employees, how well, what are the working conditions like, salary structures, raises, those sorts of items. So how does the larger company treat its people? And then they also talk about what we call sustainability of the planet. When we talk about sustainability of the planet, we are simply referring to reducing the carbon footprint of a particular organization and not contributing to things like global warming, pollution, recycling, things of that nature, right? So, what are they doing to, I guess, go green is what would be a better answer, I guess, for that. So, in considering the triple bottom line, an organization once again has a responsibility to its employees and to the wider community. So the people. So not only are we focused on what is best for our employees, but we are also focused on the wider community as a whole, right? What can we do for the wider community as a whole? It is committed to a sustainable development planet, which means we are committed to sustainability on the planet, which includes the cost of pollution and worker displacement. Okay, so again, that act again of reducing pollution, even though it could be more cost beneficial to us to pollute in the short term. But I think we all recognize in the long term that is probably not the route that we need to go. And then this idea of worker displacement. So requiring individuals to pick up and move their families, sometimes large distances. Again, committed to trying to reduce those sorts of items. Again, committing to a sustainable planet where it can be the health of the planet for the long term is in the minds of the business as well. And then it also has a responsibility to other factors. So financial calculations, so also known as profit, matters high in the minds of many of today's consumers. So success in these areas can be measured through the social audit, which again is defined as a systematic assessment of a company's performance for implementing social responsible programs, often based on predefined goals, right? And there are all sorts of organizations that can conduct those social audits, right? Oftentimes, though, when we think about the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, it's a good idea to typically think about organizations within your own community, right? So if you think about some of the different organizations in Perry, what are some ways that especially some of these these bigger companies that employ quite a bit of people, how are they participating in this triple line, right? So think about some of the organizations that maybe donate to school sponsored events, have scholarships in their name, right? Things like that. So it kind of again goes beyond just the profits of the company, the people within the company, but the people once again in the larger community. So oftentimes it's good to think of organizations that also participate in the community and try to benefit the community members as a whole. All right, so younger workers search for meaning. So millennials, okay, so we define those people to be born between 1981 and 1996, and then the Gen Zers born after 1997 care about this triple bottom line. So this has become more of a focus of the younger generation, whereas the older generations potentially, and even more likely, were probably more focused on the profit aspect of it, right? That was the forefront of the mindset when it came to an older generation of managers, is more so profit. Younger workers expect more from the organizations they work for and do business with. So not only do they expect a quality product or service, they also expect that their workers are treated well, that they are committed to reducing pollution and creating a sustainable environment, a sustainable planet. They expect that it's not just about profits for these companies. And oftentimes, if a company is found out to be maybe not behaving so well in terms of how they treat their employees or what they're doing with the environment. A lot of times younger workers and really younger consumers will decide to take their business elsewhere and participate and buy from companies that are more serious about the triple bottom line, the triple P's, as we talk them. So these generations want things like meaningful work and products that represent their personal values more than the older generations ever did, right? And that just kind of speaks to that idea of, once again, are you actually serious about participating with the triple P's? Again, being sustainable, treating your people well, or is it just for show? And again, younger generations, they take that rather seriously now, and they will, again, vote, as we call it, vote with their dollars to not participate in companies that will not do that. And you're seeing a lot of organizations recognizing that and changing the way that they do business and changing the way that they treat their workers to meet the need, or appease these younger generations so they continue to do business with them. All right. So when we talk about organizations, we have these things called stakeholders. So the community of stakeholders inside the organization. So we're going to talk about internal and external stakeholders, and then once again, we're going to have a deep focus on the internal stakeholders. So internal and external stakeholders. So managers operate with two organizational environments made up of various stakeholders. So there are what we call internal and external stakeholders, the people whose interests are affected by the organization, the first, or the internal environment. So the first people that are affected by a decision making of the organization are what we call the internal stakeholders. And those internal stakeholders are its employees, owners, and board of directors. Okay, so these are the people, naturally, as the phrase says, are on the inside of the company. So the internal stakeholders are the people that work, own, and advise the company. And the stakeholders, as defined, are the people whose interests are affected by an organization's activities, right? So we may or may not recognize it, but all of the businesses here in town, we are stakeholders of. All right. So just as an example, let's just pick Tyson in town as an example. They're a big employee or a big employer here in town. So if we had the internal stakeholders, so those are the people that are employees of Tyson. So they're the internal stakeholders, but the community at large is also affected by an organization's activities. And one, it's not a pleasant one, but one is rendering day at the plant, where depending on how the wind is blowing, a not so nice smell can waft its way into town, right? That's an example, albeit a minor one, of being a stakeholder of Tyson, right? So once rendering day hits, that unpleasant smell, even though we really have nothing to do with Tyson, some of the people who do not work for them or don't have family members work for them, we are still stakeholders in a sense that we are affected by that organization's activities, right? So that's just, one really simplistic example of a stakeholder. In that case, the community at large would be a external stakeholder, somebody who is not involved. Okay, so internal stakeholders, so employees, of course. So employees in many of today's forward-looking organizations, employees are considered the talent. Okay, the most important resource, right? So the talent, the people that make the business go. The U.S. workforce of the future will consist of employees of more diverse gender, age, race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation than we've been accustomed to. So again, we are really diversifying ourselves. And that means, with that diversification, that means a lot of different perspectives in the workplace. And that's something that managers certainly have to adjust to when it comes to being able to manage people, is a lot of different viewpoints. The second, owners. So owners of an organization consist of all those who claim it as their legal property. Sole proprietorship. So we've talked about sole proprietorships being just one owner. Partnerships, where there are two or more partners in the business, two or more owners. Private investors. So in the example here, if you're a member of a family running a car dealership and you're all owners, you are investors in a privately owned company. Employee owners. So an example of this would be Hy-Vee, where if you work for Hy-Vee, you not only work for them, but you also hold stock within the company. So an employee owner, it's still a private company, but you as an employee do own stock within the company. And then we have stockholders, which most of you who have been with me for the stock market game understand that stockholders own pieces of individual companies without working necessarily for them, right? So it's the old example of if I have two shares of a stock of Apple, I technically do own a piece of Apple, but that is really where my affiliation with the company ends, right? I don't work for them, I don't collect a paycheck from them, etc., etc. So those would be some examples of our internal stakeholders. And then we have our board of directors, our last one there. With our board of directors, what we have there, those are people who are elected, oftentimes most commonly in companies that are that participate in the stock market, and they are there to advise the company and then act in the shareholders' best interests. So with the board of directors, those individuals are really responsible for the direction of the company, and they are elected by the stockholders, but they too are internal stakeholders. Our graph here consists of the community of stakeholders. This is figure 3-1 in your book, but it just takes a look at the internal stakeholders and then the external stakeholders of an organization. And if we come up here a little bit, make it a little bit bigger here, with our internal and external stakeholders, you can see that there are the general environment, which we'll talk about a little bit more here, and then we'll talk about the task environment as well. So be sure to take a look at section 3-1 in your book to explore a little bit more, but we're going to take a look at them here as a group in this lecture. So we take a look at the community of stakeholders outside the organization. So we're going to take a look at the task environment, which, as you can see here back on our graphic here, the task environment is the green circle, and then the general environment, which is our bluish circle there. So the task environment, as you can see, there's quite a bit that makes up our task environment. So there are 10 groups that interact with the organization on a regular basis in the task environment. And as you can see there, we have customers, competitors, suppliers, distributors, strategic allies, employee organizations, local communities, finance institutions, government regulators, and special interest groups. So all of these individuals, all of these groups interact with our organization on a regular basis. And as you can see here, our customers, okay, we're pretty aware of who they are. They pay for the organization's goods and services. Our competitors, those are people competing for our customers. Suppliers, the suppliers are the vendors, the people that provide supplies, the raw materials, services, equipment, labor to other organizations and ourselves. Distributor, often called a middleman, is a person or an organization who helps another organization sell its goods or services to a customer. Strategic allies, these individuals describe the relationship of two organizations who join forces to achieve advantages that neither can perform as well done alone. So, an example of this would be there was an example of this where Disneyland Tokyo. So Disney was going to have a difficult time getting into Tokyo, getting into Japan just by themselves. So they actually partnered with a company in Japan, in Tokyo, to get really Disneyland Tokyo off the ground. And that represented a strategic alliance in that the company in Japan was much better off because they were partnered with Disney, and Disney was much better off because they were able to have a little bit more ease in terms of getting into Disney getting into a large market like Japan. So that would be just an example of a strategic alliance. Then we have labor unions. That's another one. So they tend to represent hourly workers, professional associates, and tend to represent salaried workers as well. So those labor unions represent and stand up for workers' rights. Local communities. So those local communities are obviously important to stakeholders because oftentimes, local communities, those are the people that you are hiring from. Financial institutions, so banks, savings, loans, credit unions, government regulators, those individuals, that regulate, the industry that you are in. And then finally, special interest groups, and special interest groups may try to influence specific policies that may or may not affect your organization. So they, as a whole 10 there, make up what we call the task environment. And then we have this thing called the general environment. So the general environment includes 6 forces: economic, technological, sociocultural, demographic, political, legal, and international. So you may be able to control some forces in the task environment, but you cannot control those in the general environment. Okay, so some of those task environment, those 10 that we talked about, you can help or strongly influence a lot of those 10. However, the general environment is a lot more out of your control. So as a manager, you need to keep your eye on the far horizon, because these forces in the general environment can affect the long-term plans and decisions, right? So you see, we have our 6 forces there. So the economic environment, so unemployment rate, interest rate, trade balances, that can affect the organization's performance. Technological forces, so new developments in technology. Sociocultural forces, so influences and trends originating in a country or a society or a culture's human relationships, that values may affect an organization or industry. Demographic factors, so age, gender, ethnic orientation, population, things of that nature. Political legal forces, so politics, how they shape our laws. And then international forces, so economic, political, legal, technological, that may affect the global system of an organization. And these are what we think about those for multinational corporations, right? So an example right now that you're seeing with the Russian-Ukraine war would be McDonald's, right? McDonald's had some really left, in all honesty, they left Russia due to the ongoing war there with Ukraine. And that becomes a big market for a lot of international businesses that is currently shut off, and ultimately for good reason. But that factor, those international forces though have created decisions for businesses to make, right? So just an example of the general environment. One example here that we have in the general environment. So this takes a look at states where marijuana is legal in the United States, and you can see that with the graph here. There's quite a wide mix of places, laws when it comes to marijuana. So you can see there, all states in green have legal marijuana use. Um, the purple states have medical marijuana use. The reddish orange box there, that's where it's just illegal throughout. And then the light blue is where medical CBD, which is one of the ingredients in marijuana, is legal, right? So if you're a business that is, if you're a store owner that's in the marijuana business, you have to pay attention to these sorts of things, because one state that, it might be completely legal in, say Colorado, it's completely illegal in 2 of their border states, Nebraska and Kansas. So you have to be aware of the laws surrounding your organization, so you're not technically held liable in other states. And then, as a whole too, you have to think about, marijuana is actually technically illegal at the federal level. And for those of you who've taken government before, federal laws trump state laws. So technically speaking, the marijuana is still illegal throughout the United States. However, states have how do I put this, sort of called the federal government's bluff on this law, saying, okay, well, we're going to make it legal in our state. If you want to come enforce it, be our guest. So that has also really made it interesting for individuals that participate in the cannabis industry on what their business's practice may look like. There is a fair amount of risk when it comes to operating in that industry. So that's just an example of the general environment. All right, so as we flip here, we take a look at the ethical responsibilities required of you as a manager. So these are some of the responsibilities that you have. Number one being define ethics and values. Then we're going to take about the 4 approaches to resolving ethical dilemmas. We're going to talk about white collar crime, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and ethical training. And then we're going to talk about how organizations can ultimately promote ethics as a whole. So defining ethics and values. So ethics are the standard of the right and wrong that influence behavior. These standards may vary among countries and among cultures. Ethical behavior is behavior that is accepted as right as opposed to wrong according to prevailing standards. So with that, we have 6 common workplace behaviors that are considered ethical misconduct. So the first one is conflict of interest. So this occurs when the potential for personal benefit or the benefit of family and friends makes it difficult for you to make the best decision for the organization you are representing. Abusive behaviors. These are behaviors that serve to threaten or intimidate others or that contribute to a hostile work environment. Then we have violations of health and safety regulations. So different jobs come with different sets of rules that constitutes safe and healthy behavior. Think about, food prep organizations and how they keep your food healthy and safety, protecting you from, various diseases that could come of, undercooked meat or improperly sanitized, lettuce, things of that nature. Corruption. So corruption occurs when someone uses the power with which they have been entrusted by the organization to achieve personal benefit. Discrimination, so making employment decisions based on employees' protected class status, including sex, national origin, race, religion, age, or sexual orientation. This constitutes discrimination in most cases. Then we have sexual harassment. So sexual harassment can take many forms, but it includes basing an employment decisions on a subordinate's willingness to engage in sexual conduct with a superior. And then we have, so those are our major 6 common workplace behaviors that can be considered ethical misconduct. And then we have our what we call ethical dilemmas. So ethical dilemmas often take place because of an organization's value system, the pattern of values within the organization. So an ethical dilemma, could be an instance where, about how your business may be violating, let's say, health and safety regulations, but the reason why they might be violating those health and safety regulations are to achieve greater profit, and then that greater profit may affect you as an individual because you are then benefiting with a bigger bonus. So you face an ethical dilemma of something is being violated. However, you currently are benefiting from the fact that that's violated. What do you do? And what is supposed to happen with ethical dilemmas is your company's code of ethics is supposed to guide you in that behavior to ultimately, do what is considered correct by the company standards. And of course, if, it's violating the law, then of course there's a whole other level of, not really code of ethics, but there's a whole other level that can necessarily that might necessarily trump the code of ethics in a company, right? Obviously, your company can't be engaging in illegal behavior. So, but that's what we think about when we think ethical dilemmas. And then we have values. are relatively permanent and deeply held underlying beliefs and attitudes that help determine a person's behavior, such as the belief that fairness means hiring according to ability and not family background. All right, this graph here talks about defining ethics and values. So figure 3.3, the global rates of unethical behavior. And you can see here, so these are the median rates of the most common types of ethical misconduct. And then you can see here that the most common are conflicts of interest, abusive behaviors, and the violation of health and safety regulations. Although you can still see, sizable percentages from corruption, discrimination, and sexual harassment. The four approaches to resolving ethical dilemmas. So we have the utilitarian approach. So with the utilitarian approach, so the way this approach is for the greatest good of ethical behavior. The utilitarian approach is guided by what will result in the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The individual approach. So with the individual approach for resolving ethical dilemmas, so for your greatest self-interest long-term, which will help others. Ethical behavior in the individual approach is guided by what will result in the individual's best long-term interests, which ultimately are in everyone's self-interest. So that's the individual approach. The moral rights approach, so respecting fundamental rights shared by everyone. Ethical behaviors in the moral rights approach is guided by respect for the fundamental rights of human beings, such as those expressed in the United States Bill of Constitution. The U.S. Constitution's Bill of Rights. And then the justice approach, so respecting impartial standards of fairness. So ethical behavior in the justice approach is guided by respect for impartial standards of fairness and equity. So these are the four ways that we can typically go about resolving our ethical dilemmas. All right. White collar crime, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and then ethical training. So executives' deceits generated a great deal of public outrage, and as a result, Congress passed what's called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act established requirements for proper financial record keeping for public companies. And then it also required companies to have established procedures and guidelines for audit companies. So with this, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Enron was a large company in the late 1990s that was really committing mass accounting fraud and defrauding investors, and ultimately Enron went out of business, which left a lot of people hurting financially because they were investors in the company. And then this ultimately led to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which established properly keeping financial records, making it a crime punishable by prison time for not participating by the rules of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And then the person there on the right is a woman by the name of Elizabeth Holmes, who is the CEO of Theranos company, which she was She was convicted of committing wire fraud and defrauding the investors in that company, and actually was sentenced to 11 years in prison for doing so. So this was one of the sort of not one of the major tests, but one of the tests that the Sarbanes-Oxley Act sort of provided for, is the fact that actually holding CEOs and executives accountable for defrauding individuals, in the stock market, in Wall Street, right? So Elizabeth Holmes is important for that reason, and the fact that she was in fact convicted on wire fraud and held accountable for those for the crimes that she did commit. So the federal government launched a 6-year crackdown on insider trading in Wall Street, which that resulted in 87 convictions, 14 of those which were dismissed or lost on appeal. And when we talk about insider trading, right, it's the idea of that we're trading stocks on the market because we know something that's about to happen with the company that the larger public does not know, and it allows us to gain an upper advantage. So, for instance, we might know if a company is about to earn, let's say a company, let's say Nike is about to, release an earnings report, and the earnings report's going to be terrible, right? And it's going to cause, there's going to be, mass layoffs. The company's, really struggling, and it's going to cause the stock price to tank, right? But the information's not set to be released for, a period of time, let's say, 3 days from now. Well, if we get that information 3 days in advance and we hold stock in Nike, we can say, hey, we can sell our Nike stock, right, and make a profit before we see that, before we see the earnings call and before, the earnings report, before everybody else sees the earnings report, and then, the stock price ultimately tanks, right? So it's basically, insider trading is just having a knowledge advantage over the greater public when it comes to that sort of information. All right. So how can organizations promote ethics? So ethics need to be an everyday affair, not just a one-time thing. So here's how we can do it. Part one, so one step that we can do is create a strong ethical climate. So the first step is to foster an ethical climate. An ethical climate represents employees' perceptions about the extent to which work environment supports ethical behavior. So another way that we can phrase this is it starts at the top. So the managers, the corporate CEOs, corporate executives of the company, if they practice strong ethical behavior, they're demonstrating it, if they are cracking down on it in the workplace, ultimately everybody else will likely, one, fall in line and practice that strong ethical conduct, or two, if they cannot get on board with that, they will probably find a new place to work, right? So it starts at the top and having a strong ethical climate. Screening prospective employees, companies. So to try to screen out dishonest, irresponsible employees by checking applicants' resumes and references. Some also use personality and integrity testing to identify potentially dishonest people. Number three, instituting ethics codes and training programs. Code of ethics consists of a formal written set of ethical standards in guiding an organization's actions. Rewarding ethical behavior, so protecting whistleblowers. Um, it's not enough to simply punish bad behavior. Managers must also reward ethical behavior as an encouraging, or at least not discouraging, whistleblowers. And what a whistleblower is an employee or an outside organization who reports organizational misconduct such as health and safety violations, waste, corruption, or overcharging of customers to the public. And then we have the last one there, what's called using a multifaceted approach. So the four suggestions offered above highlight the need for organizations to promote ethical behaviors by addressing both individual factors such as personality and organizational factors such as training, reward systems, and climate. So using all four of those approaches in an organization can also really help squash any unethical behavior that may or may not be occurring within your organization. All right, so the social responsibilities required of you as a manager. So we'll talk about corporate social responsibility, which is the top of a pyramid that we're going to be taking a look at here. Is social responsibility worthwhile? Opposing and supporting viewpoints. One type of social responsibility: climate change, sustainable development, and natural capital. Another type of social responsibility: undertaking philanthropy and the idea of quote unquote not dying rich. And then finally, last but not least, does being good pay off? So, corporate social responsibility, the top of the pyramid. So, corporate social responsibility rests at the top of a pyramid of a corporate's obligations, right up there with economic, legal, and ethical obligations. The responsibility of an organization in the global economy should take the following priorities: be a good global corporate citizen. And when we say that, we say it as defined by a host country's expectations. So every single organization or country, excuse me, is going to have different laws on ideas such as environmental sustainability, pollution, things of that nature. So be a good corporate or a good global corporate citizen. Be ethical in its practices. So taking the host country and global standards into consideration. obey the law, so obey the law of the host country as well as international law, and then make a profit. So make a profit consistent with the expectations for international business. So these should be the following priorities in a corporate social responsible business. As you can see here is the 4 levels of our pyramid. So philanthropic responsibility, so be a good corporate global citizen, do what is desired by global stakeholders. Ethical responsibility, legal responsibility, and then ultimately the economic responsibility. All right, so social responsibility, worthwhile, opposing and supporting viewpoints. So there is a fair amount of debate on whether or not social responsibility is worth it in the long term for companies. And here's an argument against social responsibility. So unless a company focuses on maximizing profits, it will become distracted and fail to provide goods and services, benefit the stockholders, create jobs, and expand economic growth. This supports the efforts of companies to set up headquarters in name only in offshore tax havens in order to minimize their tax burdens. So that's one example, really, that it's going to have companies, quote unquote, take their eye off the ball and not focus on providing the goods and services, at least what they can do for the best. And then also, these people that argue against corporate social responsibility are going to argue then that these companies are then going to try to find ways to minimize paying taxes to help ultimately their bottom lines and profit in the short term, because again, it does cost to, at least on the upfront, it's cost, it's tough to, do all of the right things, because ultimately sometimes the right thing can be a little bit more expensive than, doing the easy thing or the unethical thing. And then an argument for social responsibility. So a company must be concerned for society's welfare as well as corporate profits. So beyond ethical obligation, the rationale for social responsibility is the belief that it is good for business, morally appropriate, or important to its employees. So the people who argue for it are saying, think long term. Okay, so the more socially responsible behaviors that we can do, the more committing to, economic sustainability, planet sustainability, the longer ultimately your company is going to get to run and make profits more so over the long term. So it's a strategy or an argument, that is based in, look, we have a planet now. We want to have a planet, 50, 100 years, 150, 200 years that are, that works, that can work the same way or is, functioning in the same way. So there's, the argument and the push for the idea of, hey, not only are you responsible for, making profits, serving the customers, but you also have a hand, due to your power, to also help, sustain the planet, long term. So one type of social responsibility, climate change, sustainable development, and natural capital. So nearly everyone is aware of the growing threat of climate change and global warming. Scientists say that global warming is a clear and unequivocal emergency, and that without significant changes, the world will face untold human suffering. The sustainable development is economic development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay, so again, this idea of sustainable development is long-term focus, right? Long-term focus. Can we meet our needs today without preventing or making it more difficult for future generations to meet their needs? So just a few vocab terms here. So climate change refers to the major changes in temperature, precipitation, and wind patterns, or wind patterns and similar matters occurring over several decades. Global warming is one aspect of climate change, refers to the rise in the global average temperature near the Earth's surface, caused mostly by increasing atmospheric conditions of greenhouse gases such as carbon emissions from fossil fuels. And then natural capital refers to the value of natural resources such as topsoil, air, water, genetic diversity, which humans depend on. So some vocab terms there for you. Another type of social responsibility, so undertaking philanthropy, or the idea of not dying rich. So this is a quote from Andrew Carnegie, who was a big believer in free libraries. So public libraries. You may have heard the term Carnegie Library before. This comes from a man that this that put this quote. He who dies rich dies thus disgraced. Andrew Carnegie, and again, so he was a big proponent of educating, and the opportunity for the larger community to be educated. So he donated a vast amount of his fortune to the idea, or not to the idea, to the construction of public libraries across the United States. Bill and Melinda Gates, so two of the founders of Microsoft, they've pledged to spend billions of dollars on health, education, and overcoming poverty. And the Gateses have been also joined by 169 other billionaires from 22 countries fighting for better access to healthcare in undeveloped nations, better access to education in underdeveloped nations, and then ultimately overcoming poverty in underdeveloped nations as well. So philanthropy has been a increasing activity amongst the super wealthy worldwide. But does being good pay off? So indeed, it does pay off to be ethical and socially responsible. An organization's commitment to corporate social responsibility may be an important factor for you to consider during your job searches. So, we're seeing that organizations, especially with the youth movement, in terms of this really mattering to people, right? This idea of economic sustainability, planet sustainability, treating people well. We're seeing it really truthfully does matter that companies participate in this, and you're seeing that it is, even though the progress might be slow, it is doing some good out there in the world, that these individuals are trying to put their dollars towards fixing a lot of the problems that the world has out there. So you're seeing it. The progress is not as fast as I think we'd like it to be, given just the way that we kind of operate in society, of a have it now generation. But I think you are really starting to see some good out there when it comes to this philanthropy, and ultimately these these wealthy individuals putting a lot of money at a lot of different causes. Corporate governance. So corporate governance and ethics. So good corporate governance can contribute to more ethical and socially responsible organizations. CEO accountability, board composition, and CSR contracting are important governance factors for organizations and their boards to consider. And then last but not least, there, corporate governance and social responsibility. So corporate governance is about such matters such as long-term strategies, sustainable finances, accurate reporting, and then the positive work environment. So these are all factors that run into the idea and the side of corporate governance. Figure 3.5, career readiness competencies. Take a look at those in your book here as we're getting towards the end. So career corner, focused on the greater good and being more ethical. So focus on the greater good. So for you as individuals, reduce your carbon footprint, foster positive emotions in yourself and others, spend time in nature, get the proper amount of sleep, increase your level of exercise, expand your awareness of social realities, fulfill your promises and keep appointments, and then avoid people who lack integrity. So these are just some ways that you yourself can, sort of help, push us towards a more ethically balanced and a more corporately social responsible world. And then ultimately, how can we be a more ethical consumer? So purchase fair trade items, so that increases the chances your money will help provide a decent wage for people who made them. Bring your own grocery bags. So that's one way we can reduce our carbon footprint, by going with the paper bags. Or the burlap sacks or burlap bags. Don't purchase items that are ethically made or sourced. So research where and how a company makes its products. And then don't buy knockoffs. Don't buy counterfeit and illegal merchandise, often made in sweatshop conditions. So this brings us a close to our lecture here for chapter 3. So be sure that you're taking a look at the lectures, and then also make sure you're reading your chapter and participating in your group projects. So appreciate everybody listening. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.